Thanks for joining METROspectives. My guests today are the folks from the Bus Coalition. We have Ed Redfern, Corey Aldridge, and Joel Rubin. Guys, how's it going?
Great.
Great.
Doing
Yeah,
great.
happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks,
Great.
Alex.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. The Bus Coalition does very important work, and they did some work at our exchange event late last year, and we thought it'd be a good idea to follow up and hear about some of your goals and plans and what it is the Bus Coalition does. I think the coalition has evolved a little bit since its founding. If we could start off, Corey, maybe if you could talk about what remains central to its mission today, and a little bit about kind of how the Bus Coalition started.
Yeah. So the Bus Coalition began back in 2013. It was at a time when the transportation package removed a lot of the discretionary grant funding and moved it into formula, which for small and medium-sized transit systems, discretionary grant funding is extremely important for those big, chunky capital purchases. So it was originally founded with 17 members, and today it's grown to 900 plus members and supporters across all 50 states. So we've seen tremendous growth, and our core mission remains the same. Our focus is on bus and bus facilities funding, which remains extremely important, if not even more important than when we began.
And what are the coalition's kind of top national advocacy priorities right now?
You want to take that, Joel?
Yeah, thanks, Corey. So one of the main things that we're focused on, as Corey referenced, is the bus and bus facility program and proper, adequate funding levels to support bus transit needs. There's three main capital programs at the Federal Transit Administration, and bus and bus facilities is one of those. Generally gets around 20% of the funding of the three. The other one is State of Good Repair, which is the rail program, and then the CIG, which is the New Starts program. So there's generally a 40-40-20 split between those three capital modes. And what we've been trying to do is to maintain that 20% for the bus and bus facility program. As Corey alluded to earlier, under MAP 21 in 2012, we went from that historic 20% funding level down to around 8%. So that bill cut funding for bus programs from about $1 billion per year to $420 million, and it also formalized it. Before MAP 21, it was entirely a competitive grant program or fully earmarked program before then. So between the devastating cuts in MAP 21 and the full formalization of the program, that just had significant negative impacts on bus transit systems around the country. So when Ed created the Bus Coalition, that mission was clear. We wanted to restore bus funding. We wanted to restore the competitive grant program. And that mission, the primary mission, has not changed since then. That's what our main objective is. In this huge year, when it comes to transportation reauthorization, 2026, is the year. The infrastructure package, the IIJA, expires September 30th. And we were really fortunate in the infrastructure law to receive significant investments in bus facility we got to $2.2 billion per year,
Mhm.
which went a long way towards making up for that decade-long disinvestment in bus programs. So that's our number one goal, is to really protect, maintain, and hopefully increase that $2.2 billion level in the next reauthorization bill. There's a lot of headwinds. There's a lot of fiscal constraints in Washington, but we think our story and the service that our bus transit members provide on a daily basis across the country in small rural areas to large urban areas really should resonate with this Congress and with this administration. So it's really maintaining that $2.2 billion and protecting that competitive grant program. There's some efforts in this reauthorization bill to streamline certain programs and to turn them into more formula funds, which we understand the reliability of that, the certainty of that. But when it comes to bus transit and capital needs, formula funds for the vast majority of transit systems just will not get you there to purchase many formula for mid-sized and small transit systems. The formula funds won't even allow you to purchase one bus per year to replace their fleet. I love hearing Corey's story about what that would mean for his system, so I'll pass it on to him. But between the full funding of $2.2 billion and protecting that competitive grant program, that's really the prime focus. We do have some policy areas we can get into, but Corey, if you could articulate kind of what that formula change would mean for your system.
Absolutely. So I am the CEO of Santa Cruz Metro in
Mhm.
Santa Cruz County, California. We fit in that small and medium transit system size. And for us, if the discretionary funding was to be moved over to formula, that would amount to about maybe 1.5 million a year for our system. And 1.5 million buys one hydrogen fuel cell bus.
Yeah.
And we have a fleet of 110 buses. So it would take us roughly 110 years to replace our fleet, which is just not doable.
You also have to realize that we work very well with both APTA and CTAA on their programs in general, and we agree 99% of the time with them. And as we work through the reauthorization program, we'll be working with them to make sure that bus transit system is treated fairly during that process.
And outside of funding and that sort of thing, obviously there's other important aspects of reauthorization. Can you talk a little bit about the policy goals the TBC is focused on the most during this round?
Yeah, I'll be happy to start with that. And then Ed, you can chime in, Corey, if I miss something. We have a 5-pager that outlines a number of policy areas, but I'd say our top three that we hear most from our members is about local match considerations, NEPA reform, and then spare ratio elimination. So I'll touch on each of those real quick.
Okay.
So we hear from a lot of our members that coming up with a 20% local match can be challenging. And what we're trying to seek is some parity among some of the highway programs that don't require any local match for federal funds. For example, the build program. If you're a rural system, you can go after a build grant, get up to $25 million and provide no local match. And we think that that makes sense for some small and mid-sized systems that are really having a tough time coming up with the local match. And we're looking to try to have some parity with the build program, or at least reduce that 20% local match to something more manageable for mid-sized and small systems. I know Ed hears from some of his folks in Iowa that they're doing bake sales, or and Oates, one of our members, does bake sales to raise some funds for the local match. And it's just really challenging for a lot of these small and mid-sized systems to come up with those non-federal funding sources to go after some of those federal pots of money. Ed, I don't know if you want to expand on some of the stories that you hear on the local match front.
In general, uh, what we find, Alex, is that as we work with these systems across the country, if you don't have the federal match, you can't get the federal funds.
Right.
But with many programs recently through the IIJA bill, so many systems were faced with going to the counties and the cities asking them for funds. But at the same time, so were the people that are doing the streets, building the streets and getting the sewers and all the other parts of the IIJA bill that federal funds required match on. So the counties and the cities are having trouble coming up with that match. And so it makes it difficult if you have that kind of problem. And so we're trying to help resolve that.
Gotcha. And backtracking just a little bit, can you talk a little bit about your membership? I'm curious, kind of setting up the next question, but you curious, what types of agencies are your members, and kind of how broad is that network?
I mean, we have transit agencies from across the nation that are a part of the bus coalition, and we range in size from small all the way up to large systems. You know, especially with large systems, you know, even though they may run rail in their system, they still understand that at the core of everything, bus transit is the workhorse for their system. So they understand the value of the discretionary grant funding to replace those buses. So we get support not only from our transit systems, but we have outside vendors that are supportive, and other organizations that benefit from seeing more discretionary grant funding being brought into the transit systems.
Yeah, and with that broad kind of range of operators, I would guess it's a little difficult to find consensus. But can you talk a little bit about some of the issues that matter to your members right now the most? Funding, workforce development, zero emissions. What are some of the things that are most on the top of your members' minds right now?
Yeah. I mean, at the very core of it, it all really comes back to discretionary grant opportunities. That's what everybody's looking for right now. We have I think the last cycle of the bus and bus facilities grant, there were something in the neighborhood of $8 billion in asks for less than $2 billion or $1.5 billion of discretionary funding. So there's a great need out there, and that remains the main focus of the members, and that's why they belong to the Bus Coalition. Additionally into that, we have other needs like spare ratio reform, which is I can go on about that one, but
Mhm.
at some point, some agency in the past did something that required a spare ratio to be created, but now transit systems we don't have space to store more buses than we actually need. And
Right.
with the movement to newer fuel technologies, they're not necessarily a one-to-one replacement for a diesel bus or a CNG bus. Like a battery electric, you need 1.5 to 2 battery electric buses to replace a diesel or a CNG bus. So the spare ratio no longer really applies. So that would be another important thing for our members.
Gotcha. And
Yeah, and
and
just to add on
yeah,
that, one of the
Joel.
things we're also here with different administrations, they obviously have different priorities. Under the Biden administration, there was a pretty big emphasis to switch or move towards zero emission buses.
Mhm.
And this administration is looking more towards under the low no program. They're looking at hybrid buses or CNG. And ultimately, I think many of our members appreciate and have the flexibility to move in the direction in various directions. But when a lot of the money from the previous package was put towards zero emission buses, and they started building out some infrastructure for battery electric and storage and all of the infrastructure that you need to put in place for hydrogen or electric buses. There is some level of concern that there's going to be a ping pong back and forth between Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. And at the end of the day, I think what we hear from our members is let's let the transit managers decide what the best mode is, what the best fleet propulsion type is for their community and for their system. And as they're putting together the next reauthorization package, try to make it propulsion neutral and let the transit managers decide how they can best serve their residents and meet the daily demands of their riders.
Interesting. I mean, Corey, being from California, what's kind of the progress of, because California had passed the rule of going zero emissions. Is that in a flexible mode for you? I mean, is that something that you guys have kind of considered in sort of reconsidering what direction you're moving in with your fleet?
Yeah, I think it depends on the agency within California.
Okay.
Right now, we're seeing some movement or some allowances by some agencies are getting an exception so that they can purchase additional CNG buses or hybrid buses uh, because we're seeing that the alternative fuel technology is still in its infancy and there still are issues. I mean, we as Santa Cruz Metro, we're replacing half of our fleet with hydrogen fuel cell, which is a brand new technology and it's not without its own problems. So for reliability purposes and simply for cost, uh, many agencies are trying to stick with CNG or hybrid for at least another cycle.
I think, talking a little bit about the 5339 Bus and Bus Facilities program. Can you talk a little bit about what the TBC is doing with Congress to work on those funding levels?
So we've had a very active advocacy campaign through the Bus Coalition. We regularly engage our membership uh, to promote and advocate for bus and bus facility funding and the policy items that we're working on. Ed and I and a number of our board members have met with nearly, I think we're up to 75 congressional offices that we focus on the T&I committee in the House, the banking committee in the Senate, and also the appropriations committee to make sure that they understand the value and the need behind the bus and bus facility program as they're working on the next reauthorization bill. And so we have constant, regular communications with them and ensure that our members are engaged with their delegations to highlight their needs as they are working through their procurement needs and requirements to let their members of Congress know that this investment is important for their community and that we have a long way to go to bringing back the fleet size that we need nationwide when it comes to buses to where it was before some of the disinvestments happened in MAP 21.
Yeah, we also started the bus caucus, and we have Joel. Why don't you tell them how many members and what we're doing with
Yeah,
that?
yeah, we have about 40 bipartisan members. There's not as much bipartisanship as you'd hope for these days in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., but the Bipartisan Congressional Bus Caucus and the members that we have on there, we're so thrilled to have them support our general initiatives when it comes to bus transit. And they've worked in a really strong bipartisan fashion. We have two great co-chairs and Congressman Rick Larson, who's the lead Democrat on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. And we have Congressman LaHood from Illinois, who's a senior member of the Ways and Means Committee, Republican, working together to try to elevate some of the needs of the bus coalition, some of the needs of the bus transit systems nationwide. And we work very closely with the Bus Caucus to elevate that, but also look at different things that are happening in the bus transit space. There's so much innovation happening in buses over the last 10 years. We haven't seen the type of innovation happening of the last 10 years that we've seen in the last 50 years in terms of propulsion type, in terms of safety, in terms of the different apps that you're using, autonomous vehicles. There's just so much technology and innovation that's happening right now. And the Bus Caucus tries to shine a light on that in addition to the needs of bus funding. So really happy and pleased to see that the Bus Caucus is very engaged in working with um, their colleagues in the House to elevate these issues as the reauthorization bill moves through.
Yeah.
But what you find is we have systems, the rural systems that we have that have totally different needs from some of our systems like Houston or San Diego or some of the Washington ones and Ohio ones, and they're just totally different needs at all levels. And so what we try to do is make sure that our program will help recognize most of those systems and in a very nonpartisan way. We've always set it up that way originally, and we haven't changed that at all.
Yeah, that's one of the
Yeah.
benefits that we have, I feel like, as a coalition is that we're in the bus transit is in every state and district, house district in the country. We're not just an urban focused coalition. We have really small agencies and we have really large agencies. So we have that footprint that we feel like that we can get into every office on the Hill and be able to tell a story and make an impact that resonates with each individual congressional office and Senate office.
I suppose it's usually generally the case that there's a lot of new people on Capitol Hill that are passing the service transportation bill, but I feel like there's been a larger turnover recently. Um, have you been able to touch all those people, and what's kind of the general sense you get on that surface transportation bill? Do you see positive movement toward it and getting something done, in 7 months or so?
We do a lot of work on the Hill. Joel's our Washington representative and does a great job for us. But uh, we go into the different congressional offices, a lot of the new ones that you've talked about, and try to educate them on the bus systems within their region, or within their congressional districts, or in their state. And we have the statistics that we provide them on that so that they understand that the work that they do in Congress has a great deal of effect on the amount of funding that goes into their transit systems directly. Joel, do you want to?
Yeah, well, one of the fun things about working on transportation and transit is the T&I committee is one of the biggest in the House. So when Ed and I are setting up meetings, we're meeting, like I mentioned, we have about 75 meetings that we've met with different offices so far. We do have about another 20 to hit, and those are some of the newer members. And Ed's going to be coming back to DC this in 2 weeks to meet with them. And uh, one of the things I enjoy about this is trying to educate some members about how the 5339 program works. Many of them are experts in it, but some of them aren't as familiar with how the program works. And when we meet with different offices, what they have in their mind is, especially in some Republican states, they see how the federal highway formula funds work. And it's really beneficial to Republican states and some rural states because it's based on road mileage. And there's a lot of road miles in some of those rural areas. So when they look at proposals to transfer money from the competitive program to the formula program, there's some thinking that that's still going to help their rural systems. That's just not the case. And so what Ed and I are doing is making sure that some of the Republican offices and suburban areas, Democrats and Republicans, understand that how the formula works for the 5339 program is not how it works on the highway side. If they switch to all formula or significantly more formula funds, then their districts, their states are going to lose out on a lot of money. The top 20 urbanized areas see a significant portion of the formula funds. And if you're not in those top 20 systems, then your transit system is not going to get the resources they need to replace their buses. So what's rewarding for us is going into those offices, kind of explaining some of that and leaving the meetings with the staffer or the member saying, "Oh yeah, I didn't realize that the 5339 formula program, how exactly it worked. And now that I understand it, I'm going to do everything I can to protect the competitive grant program."
I mean, obviously, the advocacy doesn't just begin and end with associations like APTA and the Bus Coalition. How can agencies, manufacturers, partners get involved and strengthen the coalition's advocacy efforts?
We do a lot of work with them to try and make sure that they try to get their congressional members into their districts. So, Joel, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so most of our membership, Alex, is bus transit systems.
Mhm.
But as Corey mentioned, we do have some vendors and some OEMs that are members of the Bus Coalition. And so we try to tell our story from a number of different perspectives about the ridership, the service that's provided by our transit systems, but also the economic impact to the workforce, to the manufacturing base here in the United States for those bus manufacturers and all those part suppliers that benefit from the direct investment into the private sector industry. All of these buses are made here in the United States. All the parts come from companies that supply parts from the United States because of all the Buy America requirements. So it's an economic, it's a workforce, it's and it's a need that our bus transit systems provide. And when it comes to service, getting people to jobs, their hospital appointments, to grocery stores, helping seniors live in place. There's just so many benefits that can resonate with different offices on the Hill. And by broadening our coalition to not just having transit systems, but also having vendors and OEMs as part of that and telling our story, I think is really impactful to a broad range of members on the Hill.
Great, Corey, Ed, Joel. I appreciate taking the time to talk to Metrospectives. Is there anything you guys would like to add before we go?
think we've covered most everything, and we really appreciate you having us on.
Great. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it. And hope to hear more from the Bus Coalition soon.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Alex.
Alex.
Thank you.